this RBC, this RBC. So there is a lot of small RBCs, right? So these are all microcytes. So this mirror is showing a lot of microcytic RBCs. Okay, so you have commented on the size of the RBC. Now comment on the color. Is it normally hemoglobinized? I said you the central para should be just 1/3, but here it is greater than 1/3, right? So this is hypochromia. So this is a microcytic hypochromic RBCs. Okay, and you also find, are they uniform in size? All the RBCs are uniform in size? No, you can find certain abnormal shapes. You are finding some cell like this. This is a pencil cell. Okay, it's like a pencil, so you call it as a pencil RBC. And you also find something like this. Okay, like a drop. This is called a teardrop cell. So to brief out, this is a microcytic hypochromic anemia because hemoglobin is just 6.2. It's a microcytic hypochromic anemia, and you find some anisopoikilocytosis. Let's see some more fields. See, this is again one more field where you find predominantly microcytic hypochromic RBCs, and you can also find the teardrop cells. As I said, you can find some pencil cells, and you find something like a this one. This is called a target cell. You know, this is looking like a target. In archery or something, they used to shoot at a target, right? So this is looking like a target. So this is called as a target cell. You can find one more here. So these are target cells. So you find microcytic hypochromic anemia with marked anisopoikilocytosis. So this is a classic picture of iron deficiency anemia. Okay, so iron deficiency anemia typically presents with microcytic hypochromic anemia with marked anisopoikilocytosis. The platelets at the background may be increased, so there can be a reactive thrombocytosis associated with iron deficiency anemia. Okay, before you diagnose in the smear, the clinicians have a suspicion of iron deficiency. When the patient is anemic, and if they find certain clinical findings like hair loss, glossitis, cheilitis, and angular stomatitis, and like brittle nails or spooning of nails, like what you call it as koilonychia. If it's a pediatric age group and gives a history of pica, where you're eating non-edible things, and more chances of Plummer-Vinson syndrome, which is nothing but sideropenic dysphagia, where there is an esophageal web happening. So with this particular findings and patient presenting with anemia, the clinician before sending to lab investigation, they have a preliminary diagnosis of iron deficiency anemia. So they find PLR with these particular signs in the patient. Now, bone marrow is normally not done for iron deficiency anemia, but if you do a bone marrow, what do you find is, as I said you in the erythropoiesis, for cytoplasmic maturation, you need iron. That is, for adequate hemoglobinization, you need iron. In iron deficiency anemia, the cytoplasmic maturation will not happen. So even at the late normoblastic stages, the hemoglobin will not be adequately formed. It will be still having that bluish color. So these are called as, and the size of this normoblast will also be smaller. I said you, normoblast and all nucleated erythroid precursors will be seen only in the marrow. Okay, so the size of this normoblast will be smaller, and the cytoplasm will still have that bluish color. This we call it as micronormoblast. This is micronormoblast, and which is very typical for iron deficiency anemia. But beyond this, the very gold standard test for saying yes, this patient has iron deficiency is demonstrating iron in the marrow. So this is a normal marrow where I have stained the marrow with a stain called as Pearl's Prussian blue stain. I repeat, Pearl's Prussian blue stain, which will highlight the iron. All you see in blue, black, that is all iron, which has been highlighted. This is a normal marrow. In contrast, this is the marrow of this particular patient where you don't find any iron. You are not finding any blue, black pigment. So this is a typical marrow stained with Pearl's Prussian blue stain, showing no iron in the marrow. Okay, so the gold standard test to say iron deficiency is doing a Pearl stain in the marrow, right? So as I said you, microcytic hypochromic anemia is not only seen in iron deficiency. Okay, microcytic hypochromic anemias can be seen in other disorders also. Though this is common, you can also find in other conditions like anemia of chronic disease, thalassemia trait, and sideroblastic anemia. And you have certain biochemical parameters to differentiate it. Okay, serum iron and ferritin will be decreased in iron deficiency, whereas in other things it may be raised or normal. And TIBC will be raised in iron deficiency, and transferrin receptors will be increased in iron deficiency, whereas it will be normal or increased in other conditions. As I already said, demonstrating iron in the marrow is always gold standard for iron deficiency. So that is about iron deficiency anemia. So iron deficiency anemia, you know the clinical findings, you know how the peripheral smear looks, you know how the bone marrow looks, and you also know what are other biochemical tests you need to do to confirm the case of iron deficiency anemia. Shall we go to the next case? If we have an interactive session, it would be better. I can ask you some
Yes,
questions.
sir.
Good. So we'll go for the next case. So this is case 2. Okay. Again, you're going to do the same thing. This patient is a 50-year-old male who is a vegan by diet. You have to take a very careful history because certain histories will directly give you the diagnosis. So this is a patient, 50-year-old. He is a vegan by diet and presented with fatigue and breathlessness. His lab results showed pancytopenia. You know what is pancytopenia, right? Apart from anemia, the patient is also having leukopenia and thrombocytopenia. So he has all the 3 lineages, HB, WBC, platelets, all are low in this patient. And this is the peripheral smear of this patient. Now you need to comment on this. So how about the RBCs? So the
variable sizes.
so there is anisopoikilocyte.
Sir.
And do you find the RBCs of normal size? Is it you compare with the small lymphocyte?
No.
No.
Macrocytic.
Macrocytic.
Okay, very good.
Macrocytic.
So the RBCs are macrocytic and they also appear oval, right? So you call this as macro-ovalocytic RBCs. You already said it. There is anisopoikilocytosis, variation in shape and shape of the RBCs. So macro-ovalocytic RBCs. And what do you find here? This one. We are not bothered, but we are bothered here.
Neutrophil.
It's a neutrophil.
Neutrophil.
Neutrophil. Does this neutrophil appear normal?
No.
Why? What abnormal?
Multilobed.
Yes. So it is multilobated or hypersegmented. Okay. A normal neutrophil, if you have seen in your RNet count, it should be 3 to 5 segments or 3 to 5 lobes. Here, the number of segments is too much. Okay. So this is a hypersegmented neutrophil. So the criteria to call a neutrophil as hypersegmented is you find one neutrophil with 6 lobes. You can call it hypersegmented neutrophil in that particular patient. When you have only 5 segments, you should need to encounter 5 neutrophils of 5 segments to call that patient as hypersegmented neutrophils. Okay, so this is the criteria to call hypersegmented neutrophil. You're finding only one neutrophil with 5 lobes. No, you cannot call that patient as hypersegmented neutrophils. You need to find one neutrophil with 6 lobes or 5 neutrophils with 5 lobes. So this is the criteria to call a neutrophil as hypersegmented. So to sum up, the patient is having macro-ovalocytic RBCs with hypersegmented neutrophils. And if you have a very good eyes, you can able to see some inclusions like this dot-like things in the RBC. Okay, this is Abel-Jolly bodies, but I've got a better image for you. And you are also finding occasional RBCs like this with multiple punctate dots all over the RBC surface. This is called as basophilic stippling. As if stipple, the RBC has multiple punctate dots all over. This is called as basophilic stippling. Okay, so you find macrovalocytes, you are finding hypersegmented neutrophils, you are finding basophilic stippling and Abel-Jolly bodies. So see again on hypersegmented neutrophils, and this is Abel-Jolly bodies. Abel-Jolly bodies are nothing but nuclear remnants. Nuclear remnants. The nuclear maturation doesn't happen good enough in B12 anemia because B12 is needed for nuclear maturation. In case of its deficiency, nuclear maturation will not happen properly. So you find some nuclear remnants in the RBCs. Okay, I told you as the RBC gets matured, all the nucleus should vanish off. But here you find some remnants of nucleus, and this is called Abel-Jolly bodies. Okay, and you also find a structure. This is a very rare finding, but if you find, good. So this is an RBC with a ring-like structure. This is called Cabot's ring. Okay, this is called Cabot's ring. This is remnant of mitotic spindle. Again, this is a defect due to nuclear maturation. Okay, so you find something like this. This is called CABOT, Cabot ring. It can be seen as a round structure or it can be seen as a figure of 8-like structure. Okay, so this is called Cabot's ring. So I sum up the peripheral smear findings in this patient. This patient has macrovalocytes. He has hypersegmented neutrophils. He has Abel-Jolly bodies. He has basophilic stippling. He has Cabot's ring. And when you find all these findings in a patient with pancytopenia, you need, the diagnosis is very straightforward. It's a case of megaloblastic anemia. So he is also vegan by diet, which is also supporting the diagnosis. Okay, the B12 is more of an animal source, right? So again, before sending you the waiting for your diagnosis, the clinician may also have their own provisional diagnosis by the clinical picture. So B12 has more of a neurological symptoms and signs. Where the patient has numbness, he has cognitive deficits, memory loss, and he also have red beefy tongue. The tongue appears, so he also has glossitis. There will be depression, and if it's associated with autoimmune disorders, he may also have hypothyroidism and infertility. Okay, so what are the tests? Now you have diagnosed it, but you need to confirm it, right? Or you need certain non-invasive techniques or minimally invasive techniques to confirm this particular thing. So you can ask for serum B12 levels. Similarly, for iron deficiency, you ask for serum iron levels and serum ferritin levels. Ferritin is stored form of iron. Okay. So similarly, as you asked in iron deficiency, here also you can ask for serum B12 levels. You can ask for folic acid because both can cause megaloblastic anemia. You can ask for serum B12 levels, folic acid levels, and there's something called pernicious anemia. I hope you all know what is pernicious anemia. Pernicious anemia is an antibody towards parietal cell or intrinsic factor. Okay, so these patients have, though they consume normal B12 and folic acid, what happens is that these patients will have antibodies against the parietal cells which secrete intrinsic factor, and these antibodies will nullify the action of parietal cells or the intrinsic factor secreted by it. So this intrinsic factor is very essential for absorption of B12. So when it is not there or its action is nullified, B12 will not be absorbed and the patient presents with megaloblastic anemia or B12 deficiency anemia. Schilling's test is usually, they were previously done when I was studying undergraduation. This was very important. There may be some questions coming out of it, but now Schilling test is obsolete almost. Nobody does it, but still you need to know about it, where we give a radio labeled B12, radio labeled B12 and see for its absorption. And you can also do an endoscopy because in case of atrophic gastritis, the parietal cells are atrophied and you don't find the parietal cells. That could be the cause for B12 anemia. So here comes the classic finding, and yeah, this is why the name comes. So now this case presented with pancytopenia. So you do a bone marrow in this case, okay, bone marrow aspiration in this case, and in bone marrow aspiration you find these cells. These are called as megaloblast. Okay, remember megaloblast will be seen only in bone marrow. If somebody asks you a question like what are the peripheral smear findings in megaloblastic anemia, don't say megaloblast. You find only macrovalocytes in peripheral blood. Only in the marrow you find megaloblast. Okay, only in the marrow you find megaloblast. These are all erythroid precursors or the pro-erythroblast, which are huge, which are large, basophilic cytoplasm, and you find this large nucleus with open sieve-like chromatin. Okay, you know what is sieve. You're all quarantined at home, so your mother would have done chapati someday and she would have asked you to do sieving of flour. Okay, so this is sieve-like chromatin. In Tamil they say jallada. Okay, so this is sieve-like chromatin. You find basophilic cytoplasm and fine chromatin with a sieve-like pattern. Okay, so this is typical megaloblast you see in the marrow in case of megaloblastic anemia. You also find lot of dysplastic changes like this nuclear lobulation in an erythroid precursors like this. These are called dysplastic changes. You find that budding of nucleus. See here also something is budding out of the nucleus in an erythroid precursor. These are called dysplastic changes in the erythroid. You can also find giant, I have not got the picture here, you can also find some giant metamyelocyte and giant band forms, and you also find dysplastic megakaryocytes. All these findings is because of abnormal nuclear maturation. As I said you, B12 and folate is essential for your normal nuclear maturation. When this is absent, the nuclear maturation will not happen, and that is why these findings occur. Okay, so this is again coming back to the erythropoiesis. As I said you, for normal erythropoiesis you need normal nuclear maturation to happen, and similarly you need normal cytoplasmic maturation to happen. Cytoplasmic maturation, for cytoplasmic maturation you need iron, and for nuclear maturation you need B12 folate. Okay, so coming back, in iron deficiency what happens? Cytoplasmic maturation is lagging, whereas the nuclear maturation is normal. So what happens? You will have this bluish cytoplasm even in this stage. That's what I called it as micronormoblast. Whereas in B12 folate anemia, what happens? Cytoplasmic maturation is normal. This hemoglobinization will be happening normally, whereas the nuclear maturation will not happen and the nucleus will not shrink in size. That is the reason why you find all big cells in the marrow. These are all, the maturation will not happen and the maturation is stopped here, and you find all these cells. That is the finding in megaloblastic anemia. Okay, am I clear? Right, now we'll go for case 3. So before that, I just want to say you something like any nutritional anemia. So you mean to take this as an exam oriented way, there are etiology for any deficiency. You simply write 2, 3 or 4 things. First, there is increased demand. Okay, is adolescent period, childhood. Okay, there will be increased demand. Though you consume normal amount, it may not be sufficient. So that is increased demand. Second, you are not eating. So it's a deficient intake. That is the second reason. Third, you are eating a normal amount, but it is not getting absorbed. Okay, the patient has gone and has got some gastric cancer and has went for a gastric resection. The thing will not be absorbed. So malabsorption is a third cause. And there is some causes called miscellaneous. Okay, say like parasites. Hookworm can cause iron deficiency anemia, and similarly fish tapeworm can cause B12 anemia. So these are the common etiology for nutritional anemias. Okay, I just want to complete that, so I discussed over here. Now let's go for the third case, shall we? Okay, so this is a 3-year-old child who presented with breathlessness, fever, and petechiae. Okay, petechiae, you know, right? It's a small punctate dots on the skin surface. Okay, because of extravasated blood. Okay, so this patient gives a strong history that he had, there was no history of any blood loss or there was no chronic illness. So we sent for a lab investigation which showed pancytopenia. So you know what is pancytopenia now. And now you can correlate this pancytopenia to this finding. Okay, the patient is anemic, so he is having breathlessness. The patient has low neutrophils, so he is susceptible to infections and having fever, and he has low platelet count. That is why he is getting petechiae. So this is a clinical picture, and you are seeing the smear. So how is the RBCs? Almost normal, right? You compare it with the nucleus of small lymphocyte, almost all the RBCs are of normal size, and even the color is also fine, right? The pallor is normal. The central pallor is actually in the amount what it should be as. Okay, so this is a predominantly a normocytic, normochromic RBCs, predominantly normocytic, normochromic RBCs. So you're not able to find an answer with this peripheral smear. Now what you need to do? You can do, you can do bone marrow, but before that you can do some a relatively easier investigation or an easier test. Okay, I told you the use of reticulocyte count. Okay, so if you do a reticulocyte count, if the retic is decreased, that means like the RBCs are not produced from the marrow. If it is more, it means like the RBCs are produced but they are getting destructed. So in this patient we had a very low retic count. I've just somehow tried to get you one reticulocyte, but this patient was showing a very low reticulocyte count. If you want to, it was around 0.2%. So this patient had very, very low reticulocyte count. So this gives me an indirect evidence that there is something abnormal with the production of RBCs. So we went ahead and did a bone marrow aspiration and biopsy in this patient. So this is the aspirate. Okay, what you see predominantly this marrow was more of greasy because of lot of fat. Normally the marrow will have fat, but it will be more cellular. Here it's more fat and less cells. Okay, so it's an hypocellular. When the marrow has more fat and less cells, less hematopoietic cells, we call it as hypocellular marrow. When it is very cellular or only cells and no fat, we call it as hypercellular marrow. Okay, so it is age dependent. If you want to know the cellularity, you have to minus your age in 100. Say if you are 20 years old, you have to minus it in 100. So 80% should be cellular. The marrow should be 80% cellular. For a 70-year-old patient, 70%, so 100 minus 70, it is 30. So for a normal 70-year-old man, there should be 30% cellularity and 70% fat. Okay, so in this marrow, though it's a 3-year-old child, you see lot of fat and very, very less hematopoietic cells. So to assess cellularity, which is very gold standard, yes, triphyine biopsy. So we went ahead with triphyine biopsy, and this is the finding in triphyine biopsy. You can find this is a full chunk of marrow with the bone. This is all bones. The pink color is all bone, trabeculae, bony trabeculae, and you find predominantly fat here. Some residual hematopoietic cells here, but predominantly fat. Okay, so there is no hematopoietic cells at all. So when there is no hematopoietic cells or stem cells or immature cells, how can normal cells get produced and released into peripheral blood? So predominantly it's a hypocellular marrow, and you find no hematopoietic cells to form normal blood cells. Okay, so this is a case of aplastic anemia. Okay, aplastic anemia is, you know what is aplasia? Cell injury and adaptations, right? Aplasia is no cells. So you find aplasia of hematopoietic cells. So again, this is a normal marrow. You see, this is fat, and these are all normal hematopoietic cells from which the mature cells form and come out. Here you see, this is a patient marrow. Marrow of a patient with aplastic anemia, predominantly fat, and no hematopoietic cells. Okay. So this is aplastic anemia. Okay. So we have completed the first category, that is decreased RBC production. Now we are going to go ahead with the other category, that is increased RBC destruction. This is something like the RBCs, the RBCs are produced in normal amount in the marrow, but they are getting prematurely destructed in the peripheral blood or in the periphery, okay, outside. Okay, before I go into that, any doubts?
No, sir.
No, you are following and it's perfect?
Yes, sir.
Perfect. So the thing is, I know I'm a bit fast. I could have been much slower if there's an interaction with you, but since I want you, I just want to give a break to you. Could you able to understand? Or if you have any doubts or something, I can finish off that and we can go ahead, because it will be like non-stop firing. Jawahar sir. Jawahar sir.
Yes, Tulsi.
Sir, can we have some questions or sessions, something like that? Just for
Yeah, you can even select students and you can interact with them. You can ask them.
Yeah.
No issues.
I don't know how to do that, but still.
It's in the participant list. You can select the participant list.
Okay. What I'll do is that I'll just open the chat box. If anybody has a doubt, you can just type and send.
Yeah.
I can answer that.
Yeah, sure.
If I would be on your side, even I would not be dare enough to ask a question. We all have that problem, right? What the other friend will think about us. So you can give me a chat message so that I can see that and I can reply you.
Sure. If there is any question, I will let you know.
Yeah, sir. Right.
Carry on.
Right. Perfect. So we'll go with the next part, that is hemolytic anemias. So anemias coming under this category is called as hemolytic anemias, because this is an anemia arising because of RBC destruction or hemolysis. Let's go. Yes. Now, as I said this is anemia due to decreased number of RBCs caused by premature destruction. In the first category, we saw decreased number of RBCs because of decreased production. Here, decreased number of RBC caused by premature destruction. Okay. And it depends upon the severity of destruction. When there is severe destruction, the patient presents with severe anemia. When it is a mild destruction, the patient may present with a mild anemia. And see, the marrow has a capability of producing RBCs 5 to 8 fold. I'm telling this point because when there is mild lysis, okay, the patient may be asymptomatic because the marrow may produce a compensatory erythroid hyperplasia. That is to compensate for the loss which has happened in the peripheral blood. Okay, it can increase the production of RBCs. Okay. Now we'll go for the classification of hemolytic anemias. There are multiple ways to classify hemolytic anemias. Okay, one is by where the defect is. Okay, what is where is the defect which causes hemolysis? The defect can be well within the RBC. Okay, what we call it as intracorpuscular defect or intracorpuscular hemolytic anemia, or the defect may be outside. You have a normal RBC, but the defect is outside, which is causing hemolysis of the RBCs. That we call it as extravascular hemolysis. Okay, so our intracorpuscular hemolysis, the problem could be either in the membrane, what we call it as membrane hemolytic anemias. The problem can be there in the hemoglobin, so what we call it as hemoglobinopathies, or the problem could be there in the enzymes which is there inside the RBCs, so which we call as enzymopathies or enzyme linked hemolytic anemias. Okay, so our intracorpuscular, you have membrane defects, hemoglobin defects, and enzyme defects. For outside, it could be like a thrombi or a stunt which is in the way of an RBC, so it can damage the RBC, leading to destruction of RBC. Okay, patients who have cardiac valves, or in case of any thrombi in the capillary, the RBC in circulation can go and hit it, get damaged, and go for lysis. So that is an example for extracorpuscular hemolytic anemia. So the other way of classifying is where does the hemolysis happen? So here we are not worried about where is the defect. Here we are worried about where is the lysis happening. Whether it's happening inside the blood vessel, where we call it as intravascular hemolysis, or is it happening in the reticuloendothelial system. Okay, what is the reticuloendothelial system? The reticuloendothelial system is basically composed of liver, spleen. Okay, so if the lysis is happening there, okay, we call it as extravascular hemolytic anemias. We have examples for this as well as this. Okay, extravascular, basically you find all the membrane disorders. I'll discuss that. Okay, the next slide. So almost all intracorpuscular defects are hereditary. Okay, whenever you find a problem in the RBC which causes hemolytic anemia, it should be more likely an hereditary disorder, whereas extracorpuscular is more likely an acquired disorders. Okay, so in the membrane disorders, enzyme defects, membrane disorders, hemoglobinopathies classically have an extravascular hemolysis. That is, hemolysis happens in the liver or spleen. Enzyme defects like G6PD deficiency will have intravascular hemolysis. That is, hemolysis happens within the blood vessel. Okay, so this is the classification of hemolytic anemia. I'm not going to stress much about this. Just remember, most of the intracorpuscular hemolytic anemias where the defect is in the membrane or hemoglobin or enzyme is more likely an hereditary disorder, and extracorpuscular is more likely an acquired disorder. Okay, so the basic two features, okay, for an hemolytic anemia is increased RBC destruction, what I was saying you, and the other thing is increased marrow activity and RBC production to compensate for the loss of destruction happening outside. So these two are the important finding in an hemolytic anemia: increased RBC destruction and increased marrow activity and RBC production to compensate the loss happening. For increased RBC destruction, what happens? The RBC gets lysed and an enzyme called lactate dehydrogenase is released outside. Okay, and similarly, the hemoglobin will also be liberated out and the heme will be converted to bilirubin, and the iron in the heme will be stored in the marrow. Okay, when the lysis is happening in the intravascular component, what happens? This hemoglobin will be excreted in the urine, and this is called as hemoglobinuria. So hemoglobinuria is a finding of intravascular hemolysis, not extravascular. Okay, so any hemolytic anemia, any question tomorrow if it comes in for you for the exam, okay, you can raise for any hemolytic anemia, you can write increased LDH, you can write hyperbilirubinemia or increased bilirubin, and you can also write increased iron stores in the marrow, and only when it is intravascular you need to write hemoglobinuria. Okay, so I'm making a generalized findings for all hemolytic anemias and then I'll go fast. Okay, now coming to the second component, which is increased marrow activity and RBC production to compensate the loss. Here what happens? So this is a schematic diagram of the marrow. All the red ones are erythroid precursors and the blue one are myeloid or WBC precursors, and the purple one is a megakaryocyte. Okay, and this is the erythropoiesis what we have seen. So this is pronormoblast, basophilic erythroblast, early, intermediate, late. Then the nucleus is left, becomes a reticulocyte. The reticulocyte has RNA, and this the RBC is sent out. Okay, so in case of this is a normal thing, normal marrow, and this is normal erythropoiesis. What happens in hemolytic anemia is, so there will be normally the myeloid cells will be more, in normal conditions the myeloid cells will be more than your erythroid cells at a ratio of 3:1. In hemolytic anemia, what happens is, due to compensatory erythroid hyperplasia, the erythroid cells will predominate and it will go beyond the myeloid cells. So you have more erythroid cells than the myeloid precursors. This we call it as compensatory erythroid hyperplasia. All this is happening to compensate for the loss happening and to meet the demand for oxygen. And similarly in erythropoiesis, I told you only the normal RBC comes out. In case of hemolytic anemia, this RBC turnover will not be sufficient to meet the oxygen demand. So what happens? Some immature cells like the reticulocytes will also be sent out. I said you in normal conditions reticulocytes will be less than 2%. But in cases of hemolytic anemia, you will have increased reticulocytes. Okay, lot of immature cells will be sent out. When it is severe hemolytic anemia, what happens? Even the nucleated cells, I told you no nucleated erythroid precursors will be seen in the peripheral blood, only it will be seen in the marrow. But in case of severe hemolytic anemia, because of increased turnover, some amount of nucleated erythroid precursors, called especially an late normoblast or an orthochromic normoblast, will be sent out. you see this particular cell is the peripheral blood and you call it as a nucleated RBC. Okay, so you find nucleated RBC, increased reticulocytes, which is called reticulocytosis in case of hemolytic anemia. In marrow, you find erythroid hyperplasia. Okay, so this is a marrow picture in a case of, normally we don't do marrow in hemolytic anemia in practice. But if you do bone marrow aspiration for any hemolytic anemia, this is what you find. You find a lot of erythroid precursors. This is all erythroid. This is all erythroid. You hardly find a myeloid here. Yeah, here is a myeloid, here is a myeloid. Okay, beyond that, I couldn't find, it's all erythroid. Okay, so this is all compensatory erythroid hyperplasia for any. So if somebody asks you what is the bone marrow finding in case of hemolytic anemia, close your eyes and say erythroid hyperplasia. Put a word compensatory before. So it's a compensatory erythroid hyperplasia happens in the marrow. Okay, so all the clinical manifestations is because of what we saw. Because of low hemoglobin, you find pallor, and because of hyperbilirubinemia due to the metabolism of heme, you find icterus, that is jaundice, because of hyperbilirubinemia. And the same bilirubin can get deposited in the gallstones as pigment stones. So patients with hemolytic anemia can present with pigment stones. And sometimes what happens is that the marrow may not be alone sufficient to meet the demand. And what happens, hematopoiesis will also happen in organs like liver and spleen, what we call it as extramedullary hematopoiesis. So the demand will be so much that the marrow cannot meet. So the liver and spleen will also take up producing blood cells, and this is called as extramedullary. So apart from bone marrow, even liver and spleen is producing blood cells, and this is called extramedullary hematopoiesis. Because of this extramedullary hematopoiesis, the patient may have hepatomegaly and splenomegaly. Okay, and the marrow is also active, right? So the marrow is also, there is a lot of activity going in the marrow. So what happens, even you will find some changes in the marrow. This is a typical hair on end appearance because of widening of the two tables of the skull. Okay, this happens in hemolytic anemia, especially thalassemias. And you can, because of this increased marrow and bony marrow activity in the bone, the facial bones also becomes very prominent. This is all the syndromic facies is also seen in hemolytic anemias. As I said you, when the hemolysis is happening intravascularly, like G6PD deficiency, you may have hemoglobinuria. You see, hemoglobin is released in the urine. This is normal urine, and this is hemoglobinuria. So for signs and symptoms and laboratory investigations, if you know this, you can write it for any hemolytic anemia. It's going to be very simple. I will not be discussing all this in the subsequent cases. Okay. Now let's go back to the cases. Ready? Okay. So let's go back to the cases. Let's go with the case 4. So this is a 9-month child, okay, who is presenting to you with pallor and mild icterus. See, this is a classic combination, pallor and icterus. Pallor and icterus, think of hemolytic anemia. Okay, in nutritional anemia, you may not get icterus. Yeah, mild icterus may be possible in megaloblastic, but we don't want to go very deep. So the combination of pallor and icterus is something very likely to be in hemolytic anemia. Okay, the patient is having splenomegaly, so there is extramedullary hematopoiesis happening, which is confirming that this could be a case of hemolytic anemia. You are sending it for a complete blood count. The results come out to be hemoglobin 6.3, whereas the WBC and platelets are normal. Now, what investigations, extra investigations you want to do? You can do LDH, right? LDH will be elevated. You can do bilirubin to confirm the icterus. So bilirubin will be high. Okay. Then you can also do reticulocyte count. So
We can check the marrow. No, sir.
See,
pulse stain, sir.
Perfect. See, marrow is a very invasive procedure. It will be very painful. You should not do a marrow for a. You should go approach a case in a step-by-step fashion. You need to do all the basic investigations first, then you go for the marrow. Okay. So I said you in hemolytic anemias, nobody does a marrow. Okay. Marrow will be done for complicated cases. Okay. So you can do simple investigations. Just take a sample, look for LDH. Just take a blood sample, look for LDH, look for bilirubin. Do a retic count, whether reticulocytes are increased or not. If it is increased, it's again pointing towards hemolytic anemia. So increased bilirubin, increased LDH, and you can also do a retic count. Okay. So now this is the peripheral smear of this patient. Now you need to describe this. Are the RBCs looking normal? What happened to the central pallor?
Hyperchromic.
Hyperchromic.
Good, very good. They are hyperchromic because there is no central pallor. This is hyperchromic. Hemoglobin is very concentrated. So this is hyperchromic. And when does an RBC become hyperchromic? For normochromic, it should be biconcave. I told you, right? It's a like a donut. Okay, for all South Indians, I would say it's like a meduvada. Okay, so hyperchromic when it turns to a onda.
Circular.
Right? Yes, perfect. Okay, so this, if the RBC turns structure from biconcave, it turns to circular like this, spherical like this. The central pallor is lost, and all the hemoglobin will be concentrated, and that is why you are finding this. Okay, I'll give you one question. Just think about this. I'm giving you a volume. Okay, a set volume, say some 50 ml, and I'm telling you to occupy this volume in a small surface area. Which shape you prefer? Would you try to put it in a square, cuboid? You have to select a sphere. Okay.
So like a raindrop becomes a spherical to acquire the minimum surface area, it will take as a sphere only, sir, to occupy a
So
volume.
yes, exactly, for any for a shape to occupy high volume in a low surface area, the one shape which can do that is sphere. So that is the reason why it's becoming a spherocyte. I'll tell you why it's becoming spherocyte in the subsequent slides. But you find lot of spherocytes here. This is a normal RBC, and these are all spherocytes. There is loss of central pallor, and it is related, as you all said, it is hyperchromic. So you find a lot of spherocytes here, and similarly you find lot of spherocytes. Okay, and you are finding a cell like this, which is not reddish or bluish. It's in between both. This we call it as polychromatophilia. We call this as polychromatophilia. This is because this RBC is a reticulocyte and it contains RNA. So RNA will give a blue color and hemoglobin will give a red color. So the combination of that two gives this a tint of bluish color, and this is called polychromatophilia. Poly means more, chromatophilia. Chroma means color. So it's showing more than one color. So it's called polychromatophils, which are nothing but reticulocytes. If you do a retic stain, this will be highlighted as reticulocyte. Okay. And what is this? Don't say a lymphocyte. Lymphocyte will not be so small like this. This is a nucleated RBC.
Normoblast.
Yes, very good. Normoblast. So when the anemia is so severe, the immature nucleated erythroid precursors will come out, and you are seeing that here. Okay, this is a nucleated RBC or a late normoblast or an orthochromic normoblast. Okay, so some of the findings. So this is a case where you find a lot of microspherocytes, you find a lot of polychromatophils, and you are finding nucleated RBCs. The diagnosis is, yeah, so if you want to confirm what all you found as polychromatophils or reticulocytes, just do a reticulocyte stain. So what stain you use for highlighting the reticulocytes? You use something called supravital stain.
Supravital stains.
Yes, because you are staining the cell in its living state. So that is why it is called supravital, and the stain you use new methylene blue or brilliant cressyl blue. These two stains you use to highlight the reticulocytes. Okay, so you find a lot of reticulocytes. See, all these bluish thread-like things are all RNA, and you find so many polychromatophils or reticulocytes here. In smear, this will be seen as polychromatophils. When you do a reticulocyte stain, you find all these reticulocytes beautifully highlighted. See this noodles-like structure, na? All thin strand-like structures, all reticulocytes which are being stained by supravital staining, which is new methylene blue or brilliant cressyl blue. Okay. Now the diagnosis is hereditary spherocytosis because a lot of spherocytes in the smear. Okay, so you know this is an autosomal dominant disorder. This is basically because of the membrane proteins which are absent, especially the beta spectrin and or ankyrin. There could be band3 deficiency also. So when these proteins are absent in the marrow, what happens is that the membrane becomes unstable. Okay, this is a classic text diagram what you see in your Robbins. Okay, so this is a normal biconcave shape, and which is maintained by the presence of these proteins. When these proteins are not there, what happens? This membrane becomes very unstable, and every time when this RBC goes inside the spleen and comes out, some amount of this membrane blebs will be eaten up by the splenic macrophages, leaving very low surface area. And as I said, for a very low surface area to occupy maximum volume, the only option available is to turn to a spherocyte. That is the reason why the biconcave cell is turning to a spherocyte. Okay, so this is the reason behind RBC turning into a sphere or a microspherocyte, because these spherocytes will be smaller in size, so you call it as a microspherocytes. Okay, is that clear? Yes. Okay, now what other, so you already have told what all investigations you can do. You said you can do LDH, you can do bilirubin, you can do reticulocyte stain, but you need certain diagnostic tests. These tests will all say whether it is an hemolytic anemia. Of course, yes, you have seen a smear and you have found microspherocytes, so the diagnosis is likely to be hereditary spherocytosis, but you need some confirmatory test. So for confirmatory test for hereditary spherocytosis is osmotic fragility test. Okay, this test is very simple. What happens is the spherocytes are already in a very tensed state, right? It doesn't have any space to occupy more volume. It's already in a very tense state. So when you drop this particular RBC in a salt solution, the water from outside will enter into the RBC and the RBC will get burst. Okay, so this is the basic principle behind osmotic fragility test. You grade this and you draw the curve. And osmotic fragility, what happens is that there will be shift of curve towards the right, which means like these RBCs are very fragile and they can rupture easily. Okay. So see, now osmotic fragility is something it is practiced, but it is more laborious and time-taking test. There is one more test which is there, which is called eosin maleimide test or EMA test by flow cytometry, which can also be done. Osmotic fragility, till now textbook were saying only osmotic fragility, but now EMA is something which has come up, and it's a very good test for diagnosing membrane disorders. Okay, it is nothing but eosin maleimide test by flow cytometry. Okay, so we have just seen about hereditary spherocytosis. Let's go for the next case. So this is a 12-year-old female child who presented with pallor. Okay, it's in no case of SLE. You know what is SLE, right? Systemic lupus erythematosus, which is an autoimmune disorder, and has history of renal problems. On examination, the child had mild icterus and hepatosplenomegaly. So this too again confirms that this could be a case of hemolytic anemia. Okay, now peripheral blood. Again, these are all normal RBCs, but again, you're finding a lot of microspherocytes, right? Microspherocyte. As I move to the other field, I can find something like this. What are these? These are RBC agglutinates. Okay, these are RBC agglutinates. We are finding RBC agglutinates along with microspherocytes and aggregates of RBCs. Okay, when you find these two classic findings of microspherocytes on spherocytes and RBC aggregates, the diagnosis is likely to be autoimmune hemolytic anemia. Okay, autoimmune hemolytic anemia. Okay, and the test what you do to confirm is Coombs test. Okay, what happens in autoimmune hemolytic anemia is that you have an RBC with an antigen. You also have an antibody against that antigen, and this antibody will come and stick to that antigen, and this antibody will in turn bind other RBCs and the other RBCs, and that is how a clump of RBCs are formed. We saw this clumping, right? This is all because of antibody coating the RBCs. So which in turn attach each RBC and forms an RBC clumping or RBC agglutination. The test what you do is Coombs test to confirm, which is a direct Coombs test, and there is an indirect Coombs test. I don't want to discuss all these things. Again, it's a simple test, and I suppose you can read through books. If you have any doubts, you can ask me. So this is autoimmune hemolytic anemia. Again, autoantibodies are directed against RBC component. It could be your blood group antigens or any antigens. Okay, it could be warm type, which reacts in at 37 degrees. Could be mostly of IgG type, or it could be cold reacting, that is reacts in a lower temperature, and it is predominantly of IgM type. Okay, so whenever the antibodies are coated, the RBCs goes to the spleen, and the RBCs are eaten up in the spleen. Okay, so this is about autoimmune hemolytic anemia. So spherocytes are seen in hereditary spherocytosis and autoimmune hemolytic anemia. Okay, so if you find spherocytes along with agglutination, RBC agglutination, then the diagnosis should be autoimmune hemolytic anemia, not spherocytosis. Okay, hereditary spherocytosis. Right. Let's go for the next case. So this is a 6-year-old female child who presented with pallor and repeated episodes of jaundice. Okay, again the classic combo is there, and non-healing ulcer in the leg. Okay, so there is an ulcer in the leg, and there are bone pains. The patient is having hepatosplenomegaly. So we are dealing with some again and with an hemolytic anemia, and this patient has an unusual finding, that is an ulcer in the leg, and he also has bone pains. So this is a RBC smear picture. So this is a spotter. Whenever you find something like this, you should straight away hit the diagnosis. Okay, you find some normal RBCs, you find this polychromatophil, right? You find a bluish as well as reddish color combo. This is a polychromatophil or a reticulocyte, and you find this beautiful, right? These are called sickle cells. Okay, so again, as I said, in sickle cells, you will not find central pallor because the hemoglobin is condensed and it will be hyperchromic and it will have 2 pointed ends. Okay, so that's the criteria for to call an RBC as sickle cells. See, beautiful sickle cells. Okay, so many sickle cells here, this one, here also. So these are all sickle cells. Okay, so this is a case of sickle cell anemia. So this again a theory. What happens in deoxygenated state? The RBC turns to sickle shaped. This all happening because of replacement of glutamic acid by valine at the 9th position. So what happens? The normal hemoglobin becomes an HBS. Normal HbA becomes HBS, which gets forms polymers, HBS polymers, and low oxygen state, and that leads to sickling and clumping. Okay. So this is about sickle cell. Again, theory. I don't want to go much because you can read in your book. So what happens in sickling is that the crisis which happens in sickling is very classic. Okay, so this is normal flow of blood, but what happens in sickle is it causes this occlusion of blood vessels. Because of this occlusion, what happens? Blood flow will not be going to the organs, and it leads to a lot of symptoms. There could be painful episodes. There could be pneumococcal disease, acute chest syndrome. There could be splenic infarct because of lack of blood supply. There could be a lot of RBCs which can go and sit in the spleen, leading to hypovolemic shock, which is called splenic sequestration. There could be occlusion of cerebral vessels causing stroke. There could be occlusion of vessels of bone causing osteonecrosis. It can be a painful erection, which is called priapism, and retinopathy and leg ulcers. Leg ulcers is because lack of blood supply to the skin, and that is the reason for leg ulcers. Okay. So this is sickling test, which is again a test what we do in sickle cell anemia. This is normal. So what we do here is we create an in vitro deoxygenated state to the RBCs. We take RBCs, we mix them with 2% sodium metabisulfite. We seal the edges so that no oxygen goes in, and we see it after 24 hours or 12 hours. So this is normal RBCs, which is showing that biconcave shape. In sickle cells, all the RBCs are turned into sickle shaped. Okay, so this is sickling test, which is used to confirm your diagnosis. But more confirmatory diagnosis is HB electrophoresis. Sickling test you can do, but the confirmatory test, if in your exam, if somebody asks you what is the confirmatory test for sickle cell anemia or any hemoglobinopathies, you need to say HB electrophoresis and genetic studies. Okay, HB electrophoresis, this is normal hemoglobin pattern where you find HbA2, which is a fetal hemoglobin, and predominantly adult hemoglobin, which is the predominant hemoglobin in adults. Okay, but in sickle cell anemia, what happens? The HbA is missing, whereas predominant population is HbS, the sickle cell hemoglobin. It will be confirming your diagnosis of sickle cell anemia. Okay, good. Is that clear? Now let's go for the next case. So we have seen about membrane disorders, which have seen about spherocytosis. We have seen about autoimmune hemolytic anemia. We have seen about sickle cell disease. Now let's go for the next case, what this case will turn out to be. 6-year female child presenting with jaundice and abdominal distension. He has history of previous transfusion. So this particular history is very important. When the patient is having a lot of previous transfusion, probably the anemia or the hemolytic anemia is severe. Okay, so the patient is having pallor, hepatosplenomegaly, and prominence of frontal and cheek. Once you see this child, this prominent, this is like syndromic facies, right? So you find frontal and cheekbones very prominent. This is because of increased medullary activity of the bone, which is giving you that prominence. So again, this is going to be an hemolytic anemia. And we did with basic investigations. The basic investigations around 5.2 hemoglobin. The total count was increased 32,000. It's like 11,000 is normal, but here 32,000. Platelet is normal. As I said, findings of hemolytic anemia: increased LDH, increased indirect hemoglobin, and increased ferritin. And urine is normal, so it's not an intravascular hemolysis. Okay, so let's go and see the smear. So this is what the smear is about. You find this RBCs exhibiting marked anisopyclocytosis, and it's all hypochromic. Okay, you don't find normal hemoglobinization. It's all hypochromic, and there is a lot of target cells. Here is a target cell. Here is a target cell. Here is a target cell. So a lot of target cells, microcytic hypochromic RBCs, and beyond that, I just want you to see all these. All these small cells. What are these? These small cells. See, it has a small nucleus and an RBC like cytoplasm. So
Plasma
yeah.
cells.
No. See, seeing a plasma cell in peripheral blood is very, very rare. Unless otherwise it's a chronic disease, you find plasma cell. See, plasma cell will have bluish cytoplasm. It will not have a cytoplasm like RBC. This is nothing. As we saw in the last case, this is nothing but a nucleated RBC. Okay. See, these are all nucleated RBC.
Yes, sir.
Unmature.
Yes, immature RBC. So these are all nucleated RBCs. Okay, very good. So let's take a closer look. I suppose this is a low power, so you are not able to find it so clear. See, this is a higher power, which is oil emulsion. You find a lot of hypochromic cells, and you find a lot of target cells. See, this is the target cells, and you find these cells. This is nucleated RBC or a late normoblast. So that is again pointing towards anemia is very severe. Okay, so when you find microcytic hypochromic anemia with a lot of hemolytic features like increased reticulocytes or polychromatophil and nucleated RBCs and a lot of target cell, the most likely diagnosis is thalassemias. Okay, so again this is an NRBC. You find target cells and a lot of hypochromic RBCs. Okay, so this is thalassemia. You also find basophilic stippling and Hubble-Jolly bodies. Okay, we saw right what is basophilic stippling and Hubble-Jolly bodies in megaloblastic anemia. The same findings you may also see in thalassemia major. Okay, that is because of defective nuclear maturation, because the proliferation is that level that the nucleus doesn't even mature normally and it will all be spilled outside. Okay, so this is classic case of thalassemia major. So what is a confirmatory test? Again, HB electrophoresis for any hemoglobinopathies. If you are if the question is asked what is a confirmatory test, you need to say HB electrophoresis and genetic testing. Okay, HB electrophoresis is good, but again you can still confirm it to the next level by genetic testing. So HB electrophoresis, what happens? So that's a case of beta thalassemia, and this is normal electrophoresis. You're finding predominant adult hemoglobin, you're finding some fetal hemoglobin and some HbA. Okay, and this is a electrophotogram or HB electrophoresis of this patient. Here what happens? HbA is reduced, but you find predominantly HbF. Why fetal hemoglobin? Why fetal hemoglobin? Why there is increased fetal hemoglobin in beta thalassemia? The reason is in beta thalassemia what happens? There will be no beta chains. That is why it is called beta thalassemia. So you have only alpha chains. For HbA, normal adult hemoglobin, you need alpha chains to pair up with beta chains. When alpha chains pair up with the beta chains, it will form adult hemoglobin. Okay. In case of beta thalassemia, you don't have beta chains. So what happens? The alpha chains will pair up with the other chain, which is the gamma chain. So alpha chain and gamma chain, when they pair together, they form fetal hemoglobin. Okay. That is the reason why you have high fetal hemoglobin in beta thalassemias. Okay, I repeat, in beta thalassemia will not have beta chains. So the alpha chains will pair up with gamma chains, because since beta chain is there, it will pair up with the other chain. Because without pairing, it is unstable, so it has to pair with some other chain. So alpha chain will pair up with gamma chain to form fetal hemoglobin. Adult hemoglobin is made up of normal alpha chain and beta chain. So thalassemias is basically a disorder of globin chains, which is quantitative. It's a quantitative globin chain defects. Whereas in sickle cell anemia or HBC, those disorders are a qualitative defect because they have normal hemoglobin chains, normal levels of hemoglobin chains, but they are qualitatively abnormal. Okay, this is quantitative defect, thalassemia. Sickle cell is a qualitative defect, okay, in globin chains. Okay, so thalassemia, this is basically a defective production of globin portion of hemoglobin molecule, and I repeat, it's a quantitative defect. In contrast, sickle cell is a qualitative defect. So decrease synthesis of adult hemoglobin. So in beta thalassemia, you will not have beta 2. So alpha 2 will pair up with gamma 2, forming fetal hemoglobin. So it's of two types. This case is a beta thalassemia, but there's also called other type called alpha thalassemias. Okay. So again, the syndrome methods, the patient can be asymptomatic, depends upon how severe the disease and how much globin chains the patient have. They may present as asymptomatic or severely symptomatic. So it can be beta thalassemia minor, there can be beta thalassemia intermediate or beta thalassemia major. All this is based on clinical presentation or the severity of anemia. Okay. So now this is a case where you find microcytic hypochromic RBCs. I suppose by now you all agree with me. This is microcytic hypochromic RBCs, correct? And you find lot of target cells. So this is a typical. And do you find anisopoikilocytosis? Not as much as we saw in iron deficiency. So almost more or less same microcytic hypochromic RBCs with not much anisopoikilocytosis. and many target cells. This is not iron deficiency. This is thalassemia minor. Okay, this is thalassemia minor or thalassemia trait. Okay, so one differentiating point by smear is anisopoikilocytosis will be less in thalassemia trait, and in iron deficiency it will be more. And you find lot of target cells in thalassemia trait when compared to iron deficiency anemia. Okay, so what happens to the RBC indices in this patient? MCV will be, yes, it's microcytic hyperchromia, so MCV and MCH will be low. Okay, I forgot to say something. Okay, now why this gentleman? One thing is that I just want to deviate you from topic and bring back your attention. And why this gentleman coming over here? Anybody? Why?
Immune disorder.
He is suffering from immune disorder. Yes, he is a patient of myasthenia gravis. I do agree. Anything else? He is also a patient of thalassemia trait. Thalassemia trait. Yeah, he is a patient of thalassemia trait. Thalassemia trait is a very, very common condition. Okay, but since it's asymptomatic, nobody gets tested. So it's a very common condition. So thalassemia trait is very common. Okay. And I forgot to say one thing, that is hereditary spherocytosis patients will have high MCHC. Okay, mean corpuscular hemoglobin concentration, because the hemoglobin is very concentrated in spherocytes, right? So hereditary spherocytosis patients will have high MCHC. Okay, so will I go for the next case? So this is a,
Excuse me, sir.
yeah.
Sir, that thalassemia trait, once again, can you discuss the less anisopoikilocytosis and what else you told?
Sure. So this is a case of thalassemia trait. Okay, see, you agree with me, this is microcytic hypochromic, correct? This is microcytic hypochromic. You compare with the nucleus of small lymphocyte, the RBCs are smaller. Okay, so it's microcytic RBCs, and you find the central pallor, it is more than 1/3 of the diameter, correct? The central pallor is greater than 1/3 of the total diameter, correct? So this is hypochromia. So this is microcytic hypochromic. So microcytic hypochromic, the differential diagnosis include iron deficiency anemia, correct? And thalassemia. So to differentiate now, you need to see other findings. In iron deficiency, you'll find a lot of anisopoikilocytosis, which is variation in the size and shape of the RBCs. Here, the RBCs are more or less uniform. Okay, so that helps you to differentiate from iron deficiency anemia. You don't find any pencil cells here, correct? You don't find and you find a lot of target cells here. In iron deficiency, you find 1 or 2 target cells. Here, the predominant population is showing that target cell is like a target. Okay, so there's many target cells here. So that is how you differentiate many target cells and less anisopoikilocytosis. And if you do a reticulocyte state, you find many reticulocytes here compared to iron deficiency anemia. Okay, so that is how you differentiate between iron deficiency anemia and thalassemia trait. So this we discussed.
There will be different now in both cases.
Sorry. Okay, bone marrow picture. See, it's a different. Again, I said you, if you do a bone marrow in thalassemia trait, what you find? You find more of erythroid precursors. You find erythroid hyperplasia. Okay, in iron deficiency, you find micronormoblast and absent iron stores. And similarly, if you do iron stain in iron deficiency, there will be absent iron stores. And in thalassemia trait, you may find increased or normal iron stores. Okay, but again, I'm telling you, bone marrow will not be done in all cases of hemolytic anemia. For exam say you need to write, I agree with that. But still, a practical approach in hemolytic anemias, bone marrow is less done. Okay, now let's go for the next case. This is a 2-year-old child presenting with colored urine. See, now this colored urine will give you an idea. This particular patient, colored urine, progressive pallor, hepatosplenomegaly. This patient has intravascular hemolysis because he's passing colored urine. Okay, red color urine is always intravascular. Hemolytic anemia with red color urine, as I discussed, it's most likely it should be an intravascular hemolytic anemia. So as we know, bilirubin is raised and LDH is raised. Now this is a peripheral smear picture. You find some normal RBCs and you're finding something like this, something like a helmet, right? This is an classic helmet, like any Royal Enfield riders would have seen an helmet like this. Okay, so this is a helmet cell. You find a lot of helmet cell, and again in helmet cells, or these are also called as bite cells. You know, you take someone taken a bite of the RBCs. See, this is also called bite cells. Okay, what are bite cells? These are RBCs with a portion missing, as if someone has eaten up or taken up a bite of it. Okay, these are called bite cells. This is a bite cell, and in some case you can find a membrane in the RBC with no hemoglobin. Okay, it's something like this. The hemoglobin would have been forming a condensed thing, and you find a membrane with no hemoglobin there. This is called as a blister cell. Okay, this is called a blister cell, and you are finding some inclusions in the RBCs. Okay, these are not Hubble-Jolly bodies. We saw Hubble-Jolly bodies, right? These are Heinz bodies. How do you differentiate Hubble-Jolly body and Heinz body? Is that Heinz bodies will be normally seen sticking onto the RBC membrane. Okay, so RBC, it will be seen sticking onto the RBC membrane. I suppose I could have got a better image for this particular case, but I just got this. Okay, so a constellation of findings of Bite cells, blister cells, and Heinz bodies is a diagnostic for G6PD deficiency. Okay, it's a G6PD deficiency. Okay, so if you want to highlight these Heinz bodies, sometimes you may not see it very clearly in Romanowski stained smears. And if you want to highlight the Heinz bodies, you can do a supravital staining or your reticulocyte stain, where the Heinz bodies are highlighted beautifully. It is all seen sticking onto the membrane. So if you find an inclusion sticking onto the membrane, more likely it should be Heinz bodies. Hubble-Jolly bodies will be seen in the cytoplasm. Okay, inside the cell. If you've seen any inclusion sticking onto the RBC membrane, it is Heinz bodies. Okay. So Bite cells, blister cells, Heinz bodies directly points towards G6PD deficiency. Okay, why Heinz bodies in G6PD deficiency is that this G6PD enzyme is very important to manage the oxidative stress in the RBC because of NADPH formation. Okay, if G6PD is not there, NADPH will not be formed, and then this NADPH will not help to formation of glutathione reductase. This glutathione reductase is a very good free. I mean, it's an antioxidant. Okay. So it helps to combat free radicals. I suppose again first chapter, cell injury and adaptations, very important chapter. Okay, so when this G6PD enzyme is not there, this glutathione reductase will not be formed, and the RBC is subjected to free radical injury. Yes, it will be free radical injury, and it goes for lysis. Okay, so G6PD, and whenever it is exposed to oxidative stress, what happens is that these globulin chains will get precipitated, forming Heinz bodies. Okay, oxidative stress leads to formation of Heinz bodies. So this G6PD is an intravascular hemolysis, and it is an acute episode. So it, like, the patient will be normal, suddenly there will be hemoglobinuria and there will be drop in hemoglobin, and when you find that could be a G6PD deficiency. It is precipitated basically by some medications, especially anti-malarials. Okay, you know, my chloroquine or any anti-malarials can, or quinine drugs can precipitate G6PD deficiency, and similarly beams or some infection also can precipitate G6PD deficiency. Okay, so I repeat the peripheral smear findings of G6PD deficiency, which is classic. It will have Bite cells, it will have blister cells, and it will have Heinz bodies. Heinz bodies are formed because of globin chain precipitation because of oxidative stress. Okay, to confirm the diagnosis, you need to do G6PD levels in the blood. G6PD levels you should not do during an acute episode. When the patient is having severe hemolysis, don't do G6PD. At that time, it may be normal. You need to do at a when the episode is off. That is something I just want to say to clinicians and others and seniors. So the other case, the last case is, this is a case. So I can see some whooping sound coming out when this saying like this is the last case. Yeah, I agree. This is going to be tough, but still. Okay, 5 years old child presenting with loose stools for 4 days. The child is having fever and it also has vomiting. So it has some periorbital puffiness. So when I say periorbital puffiness, it means like there is some renal damage. Okay, the patient is having failure because of anemia, and it has hepatosplenomegaly because of extramedullary hematopoiesis. So this is hemoglobin is 5.5. The total count is 6,300, and surprisingly the platelet is also low. Till now we have seen hemolytic anemias with only low HB. These two will be more likely normal. Okay, in platelet 60,000 is something low. So you have anemia and thrombocytopenia here. So when you have anemia and thrombocytopenia in a case of hemolytic anemia, you need to rule out an important condition called microangiopathic hemolytic anemia. Okay, I'll tell you what is that. So in this patient, we did urea, creatinine, and LDH, all were elevated. And this is the peripheral smear findings of the patient. So you find normal RBCs and you find lot of these cells. Okay, and you also find these cells. This is nothing but, by now you should be okay with this. This is a late normoblast or a nucleated RBCs. So the anemia is very severe. So immature RBC precursors have come out, and you find lot of these cells. What are these? These are nothing but RBC. Yes, RBC fragments. some of the RBCs have got ruptured, and those fragments are seen in the smear. These are RBC fragments, and we call these as schistiocytes. Okay, so you find a lot of RBC fragments, which is schistiocytes, against the background of hemolytic picture, and you don't find any platelets in the background. Have you observed? See, there's no platelet in the background. Hardly, I suppose, one is here, but predominantly there is no platelets in the background. So this is a case of microangiopathic hemolytic anemia. Okay, so again, RBC fragments. See, a lot of RBC fragments, and you don't find any platelets in the background. The problem here is what happens is that there will be thrombi in the blood vessel, and the RBC goes and hits that thrombi, and the RBC gets broken, and you find these fragments in the peripheral blood. Okay, so again, in this patient, it's an intravascular hemolysis, right? Because RBC is dying in the circulation. And when you find these patients also present with hemoglobinuria like G6PD deficiency. Okay, so it's an intravascular hemolysis. So this is microangiopathic hemolytic anemia. There are two types. One is hemolytic uremic syndrome, and other is TTP. So hemolytic, this patient is having kidney, rise urea creatinine and a kidney problem. So this patient turned out to be hemolytic uremic syndrome. Okay, so this is apart from microangiopathic hemolytic anemia, where the RBC is getting lysed by the thrombi in the blood vessel, there could be other causes for breakage of RBCs, like cardiac valve processes, which has been fit in a heart patient, can cause rupture of RBCs, or any narrowing of obstruction of microvasculature, as in our case, microangiopathic hemolytic anemia, and some other causes like mechanical RBC injury, like march hemoglobinuria. In soldiers who are marching, the RBCs can get damaged against their foot, and you can find a lot of fragments in these soldiers and people who are marching. So again, schistiocytes, Burr cells, Helmet cells, these are the names which is given for that fragmented RBCs. Okay, so fragmented RBCs and thrombocytopenia and features of hemolytic in the background, think of microangiopathic hemolytic anemia. Okay, so this case, I've not got a case, but I just kept it for completion. This is a paroxysmal nocturnal hemoglobinuria, which is again a type of hemolytic anemia. Here it's a stem cell disorder, where what happens is that the RBC has some anchors to which some proteins are attached, especially CD59, which helps the RBC against attack of complement. You know complement, right? There are many complement factors and many pathways of complement activation, like classical pathway, alternate pathway. The RBC has anchor called GPA anchor, which has which link it to some proteins called CD59 and CD55, which acts against this particular complement mediated lysis. When you don't have this GPA anchor, you don't have these proteins attached to the RBCs, right? When you don't have this anchor, these proteins are not attached to the RBCs, and this naked RBCs is easily attacked by complement factors, and it induces complement induced lysis. So this is a case. This is a problem in paroxysmal nocturnal hemoglobinuria. So it's an acquired defect where it doesn't have the activated proteins like CD55 and CD59, and leading to lysis. Okay, so you can, this case can be diagnosed by flow cytometry by seeing for expression of CD59 and 59 and 55 in RBCs. Okay, apart from these, there can be some other rare causes of hemolysis, like falciparum malaria. When there is severe falciparum malaria infection, there could be lysis, so which is a very common condition. But I have not discussed about malaria here because again it will be too extensive. So falciparum parasite can cause hemolysis, and clostridial infection or clostridial sepsis can cause hemolysis. This is very rare, and sometimes hemolysis can also occur with mycoplasma and other organisms. So among the infectious causes of hemolysis, please remember falciparum, very, very important and very common also. Clostridium and mycoplasma are rare, but they can also cause hemolysis. And this hemolysis is basically antibody mediated. Okay, it's basically antibody mediated, or you can say it's a type of autoimmune hemolytic anemia. So with that, I'll conclude